Welcome to The Point. I'm your guest host, Jon Fugelsang. We are broadcasting this just a few days after the conclusion of the Democratic and Republican national conventions. A very exciting convention season this week that will be covered on this show. Of course, we saw Clint Eastwood speak to the GOP convention, and people who acted like they never saw an 82-year-old man talk to his stool before. The best part of that convention for me would have to be seeing the GOP applauding a man who was making them applaud Barack Obama's compromises, who also happens to be pro-choice and pro-gay marriage. Then, of course, we got to see what John Boehner looks like wearing orange after Labor Day. The Democratic convention, lots of fun there as well, of course. Barack Obama had to move his speech from the Bank of America Stadium to the smaller venue, marking the first time any president has ever said the word no to Bank of America. And Bill Clinton got us the chance to see the state of North Carolina mass applauding a vegan. Stranger things have never happened, and we're going to cover that and much more on this episode of The Point with a panel I am really thrilled to have. Joining me today, I don't even have to give you an intro. You're Greg Proops, one of the funniest men in the planet, well-known actor, writer, voice artist, producer, comedian from the hit improv show Whose Line Is It Anyway, and the host of the fabulously popular Smartest Man in the World podcast. Man, I love you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Kathy Tavoularis is a longtime GOP activist in California politics who just recently returned from the Republican National Convention, where she served as executive director of the California GOP delegation. Very jealous. I have a lot of questions for you.
Can't wait for them.
I wish I had been there. And Hugo Schwyzer. I got it right. No, help me out. I'm Fugelsang. I got to get it right. Schwyzer.
Schwyzer?
Schwyzer.
Because I do a lot of schwitzing.
I'm Fugelsang because I do a lot of fugling, so I can relate.
Outstanding.
You're a history and gender studies professor at Pasadena City College and columnist for Jezebel, and the co-author of Beauty Disrupted, which was the biography of supermodel Carrie Otis, who has great taste in clothes, not such great taste in life partners. And I thank you all very much for being here today. We have three great points this week that really cover the spectrum of what Americans are fighting about these days. One is from A Guy's Guide to Feminism, author Michael Kaufman, who's going to talk about what role men do and should play in what happens with women's bodies. Another point about what it says about our democracy, that a small sliver of undecided, low information voters in a few swing states are going to pick the next leader of the free world. But first, hot off the recent GOP and Democratic conventions, we ask the pressing question: should we as a nation even bother having political conventions anymore, or are political conventions completely passe and obsolete? And this point comes to us from LA Times opinion writer Jon Healey. Take a look.
Hi, I'm Jon Healey. I'm an editorial writer for the Los Angeles Times. My point is that political conventions are still relevant. And here's why. There's a couple things they accomplish. First and most important, they speak to the base. The people who tune in to the conventions are mainly the people who are part of that party. Whether they're really deep in the core of it or on the fringes, they're still Democrats watch the Democratic convention and Republicans watch the Republican convention. And what it's doing for that base is it's telling them, here's what we believe in and here's why we think we're going to win. And this is what accounts for the balance. If you look at traditionally, when you have a Republican convention coming out of it, you have a 3 or 4, 5, 6 point bounce in the polls. Democratic convention, same thing happens. And this is even though it's not being watched by many folks in the middle. It's mainly being watched by the partisans. What is that doing? It's telling the partisans, hey, there's a reason to believe. Now, it does that, the second main thing, by laying out some broad themes. This isn't about policy, Bill Clinton aside. It's really about messaging, the very big picture. For Republicans this year, the very big picture is the economy is terrible. President Obama is not the guy to lead us out of it. In fact, he's the guy who's making it worse. For Democrats, the message was, the economy may be bad, but it was worse 4 years ago. And the other guys are not the people to solve this problem. They'll just double down on the past. Very simple, very broad. Now, this stuff gets fleshed out in the debates. We'll examine it in greater detail through the always helpful 30-second ads. And then we'll come to Election Day, sort of carried forward a bit by the energy coming out of these conventions. So that's why I think, although we don't need 3 days of them anymore, and the chance of somebody actually being nominated in a conventions fight is slim, they're still worth having. That's my point. If you want to read more by me or by the LA Times editorial board, try our blog, which is opinion.latimes.com. Thanks.
Thank you, Jon Healey. Kathy, I'm going to go to you first on this one, since you were actually at one of the conventions. He makes a lot of good points, but is he right? Are these things just a great big exercise in getting your talking points straight, or is there still a civic function for presidential
Well, John,
conventions?
I'm going to fight for my right to party. I think that we absolutely need these conventions. Both parties need these conventions. It's a time for all of us to come together, reaffirm our beliefs, and get behind our candidate. And it's not just about the presidential candidate. It's about our local candidates back home, our members of Congress, our governors, our senators. And it's a time for our parties to come together and write a platform and reestablish what we believe in. I think for both parties it's important. I think it creates jobs for the city that hosts them. It's much like the Olympics. It's a moneymaker for the municipality that hosts us. I absolutely believe that conventions should happen.
Is it a money waster when you consider that everyone watching this has already made up their minds?
I don't believe that. I think people do watch conventions. I completely disagree with Mr. Healey. With all due respect, well, actually disrespect to the LA Times, they don't know what they're talking about. People will watch these things. People watch the Olympics. People watch this. I watched the Democrat convention, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was very entertaining watching the actors and actresses up there. I
think that was a dig. I'm not sure.
Ava Longoria is wonderful. I think she's wonderful.
Yeah, she's no Victoria Jackson.
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
And she's no Clint Eastwood in an empty chair. But I enjoyed her at Wendy's when she was flipping burgers. But I think that, with all due respect to Mr. Healey, I think that conventions are important to people who want to make up their minds. There are those people who are undecided, and we see those people every day in the grassroots, and who have no idea who Mitt Romney or Barack Obama are, George Bush or Al Gore. They have no idea who these people are, new 18-year-olds, and they want to watch the convention to see what all the hoopla is about. And they'll want to see Clint Eastwood or an Ava Longoria and see what's going on, or they see their governor or their congressman on TV. Absolutely, they're going to see a message that they'll resonate with.
I'm really inclined to agree with her. I mean, I think that these things are a 3-day exercise in getting people thinking about civics. And if there weren't conventions, Barack Obama would never have been heard of. He would never have taken the national stage. Liddy Dole, you could argue, would never have reached
Bill
national
Clinton,
office.
1988, that was his first big one.
Exactly.
And almost ended his career in 1988.
Spoke for 7.5 hours.
Exactly.
And also, I like them. I think they're historical. I remember as a kid, Ronald Reagan coming out and announcing that George Bush would be his vice president nominee. In a speech, he waited till the actual convention. It was so exciting, and it really does get the base engaged. Yeah, it's a big pageant, and yes, they're all meeting to agree on their talking points. And when you talk about the partying, I found it rather interesting. It was well documented, the noted spike in man-to-man hookups on Grindr in Tampa during the RNC. I was very sad they had to cancel the first night because there were a lot of call girls that lost rent money on that. But, for all the sordid fakeness of it, I do think that it does turn people on, and people who are not news nerds like us paying attention do get sucked in and wake up in time for the campaign season.
But I think the problem is that it deliberately siphons people, or really I should say directs people, into one of two parties. Over and over again, we complain we live in a two-party system where there is no third option. Nothing reifies that more consistently than the media coverage of the conventions. You have the Republican convention, then the Democratic convention, or it's reversed, depending on who the incumbent is. But we don't cover the Green convention.
I think
we don't cover the
C-SPAN does at 2 in the morning.
Yes, at 2 in the morning. But it's, if we want alternatives, then we have to create a media culture and a national narrative that opens ourselves up to alternatives.
But in a profit-driven media, there's not a lot of money in airing the Right to Life Party's convention, although I wish they would.
Yes, I think we would get a lot of humor out of it.
No, I think actually a lot of Republicans who were discussing with Mitt Romney would find a community in the Right to Life Party.
But there also has to be a want for these alternatives. I mean, there's not enough registered voters out there that are part of the Green Party to constitute a convention.
Well, they have a convention. It's just they don't get invited to debates and they don't get aired.
That's right.
Theoretically, the Democratic Party is supposed to include the big tent of everybody. I agree with what you're saying, and I'd love to see more alternative viewpoints all the time. It doesn't inspire critical thinking, let's put it that way. It's a rah-rah cheerleader kind of event. However, I thought both conventions this time were excellent television.
I thought so too.
There was excitement, there was thrills, there was chills, there was heroes, there was villains, and that's what makes people, I think, interested in politics at the level you're talking about. so many people aren't engaged at all, or just let everything slide by. To see Clint Eastwood, or to see Barack, or to see Bill Clinton get up there, if you're 18 years old, you haven't seen Bill Clinton the way we've seen him for a zillion years, and you don't have any idea of what a great orator he is off the top of his head. And if you're 18, you probably don't know who Clint Eastwood is. You might. All of a sudden, why is he going so crazy, and what's happening up there?
Well,
you know what I mean? I don't mean going crazy like insane. I mean, the crowd's going crazy, and he is, you know.
The crowd loved it. I've been defending Clint Eastwood because he was trying to do a Newhart monologue, and it was...
What he did was great TV.
Well, we complain about how scripted and over-rehearsed these things are, and to see a moment of real rawness, I think it backfired in the RNC because they had a very fine little propaganda film about Governor Romney that got pushed out of the primetime lineup for that speech, and if he had been vetted, they could have planned it a bit better.
I will say, being on the floor, very near him, very near...
Crowd loved it, right?
Loved it. And you know, going home that evening, going back to the hotel and seeing the coverage of it, it was completely different from being there. You were eating it up. For a minute, you didn't notice the chair when when he was walking out, everybody just saw him. And so when he was talking to the chair, you're like, and then you really got into it and understood what he was doing, the comedy bit of it, and so you really got into it. So it was great TV.
I actually was covering it for Current TV, so I watched that with Vice President Gore, Governor Spitzer, and Governor Granholm, and Cenk of the Young Turks, which made me feel like Ringo. I was, but I did point out all throughout that the crowd in the room loved it. And again, I like that bit of theatricality. I like that the RNC, even though it's now blown back in their face, I think the real loser was Clint Eastwood, to be honest with you, because unfortunately, as charming as some of us may have found that, anybody under 30 is going to think Clint Eastwood is just that crazy old guy from the RNC, which is tragic. But moving on from there, you mentioned Bill Clinton, and one thing I found rather interesting was that Bill Clinton was arguably the star of the Democratic National Convention, but Mitt Romney got to Tampa, and it was just like Vietnam, because Bush and Cheney weren't there. As a Republican, are you surprised that they're still keeping W that far away? Is he still that toxic for the convention?
They did not keep W away. He announced early on that he was not going.
But this is two conventions in a row. It's two conventions in a row
Well,
now.
first of all, he wasn't in Minneapolis because of the hurricane, if you remember. And he would have been vilified by you people if he showed up at a Republican convention in 1988.
Do you mean the Jews that are controlling?
That's right. Look at those comedians.
Right, of
comedians.
Of course. Well, and
very early Jewish.
And why on earth would anyone ever vilify George W. Bush in 2008?
Right. So you know that to be true. Now this time, he announced early on, and I know him very well. He has no interest in ever coming to a convention at all.
I'm sure he has no interest in ever going to one again as well.
What about the idea that they didn't even mention him or Cheney or Nixon or
He was mentioned, and there was a
there was a film
tribute
of him and his father as well.
Yeah, there was a wonderful tribute to him.
So unlike the last convention, he did make an appearance via video. But it does underscore the fact
Jeb was there.
Yes, Jeb was.
Yeah.
And Jeb famously saying that my brother kept us safe, meaning no one's told Jeb about 9/11. However, what I found really interesting that he wasn't there was it underscores this critique of both parties, that it really is just propaganda without any civic value. Is that a fair criticism? And do you think we're now witnessing that now it's down to 3 nights? Is it foreseeable that within half a generation it's going to be just a one-night event?
You know, I noticed that. Obviously, the RNC was scheduled for 4 nights, and we had to reschedule.
And it used to be primetime coverage from 8 to 11.
Now, I don't know why the Democrats
were
were down to 3 nights. You guys will have to tell me. But I was thinking, I know that cable TV has been wanting to schedule it down to 3 nights.
Yeah.
I like the 4 nights because...
I do too.
And there's, what people don't see, there's a lot of business going on. I mean, there's resolutions and there's credentialing committees and rules and all this other stuff that you have to take care of for 4 years. So there's a lot of business being done that you don't see on the floor. So there's a lot of stuff to be done, and conventions are very important for other reasons, not just the rah-rah.
No, it's really the backroom dealings of both parties that get these things
You don't meet
established.
again for 4 years.
And thank you. I think that propaganda does have a civic value. I mean, I'm not sure that it's correct to make it into a false dichotomy. We need to see the parties put on their best show in order to be able to discern what really strikes a chord with us and what makes us say, no, absolutely not. You know, it's good theater, good advertising helps us decide what we want. We are a generation, all of us now, you know, no matter how old we are, our generation's raised on advertising. And so advertising is not something we necessarily buy into mindlessly anymore. Most young people are actually pretty discerning about what's a good product and what's a lousy one. That's why they picked an iPod over a Zoom or whatever that, you know, Microsoft thing was. And that's that same level of discernment is something young people can bring to watching the theatricality of the Democrats and the Republicans. I'm going to give young people more credit, and really all of us more credit. We can watch the show, recognize that it's a show, and distinguish between what's really valuable and what really is a lot of fluff.
I felt like in both these conventions, I've never seen, both parties were really pushed into their corner. Having watched every convention since like 1968, when I was a child, to see the Democrats get out there and use the word abortion on the floor, I don't remember that happening before. To see the Republicans get out there, everybody was backed into their corner and fought for it this time. And I think that's where the state we're at, which speaks a little bit to the horrible non-cooperation state that we're finding ourselves in, but also the other way, like you say, it presents the case, and people are either galvanized or not galvanized by watching those things. To me, the crime is that the corporate media doesn't want to show anything for 4 nights in a row. They didn't show the Olympics all the way through, and that's a benign, purportedly benign event that we can all enjoy. They want everyone to be as dumb and ignorant as humanly possible, and that's all the corporations have in mind is profit and growth. So if they can't make money off showing it for 4 nights, they're not going to. 1 hour a night is obscene, quite frankly.
I agree, and I was very disappointed. And I remember being a kid when they lasted 4 or 5 nights and went for several hours in a row.
Right.
And I'm glad you mentioned abortion. That will relate to our next topic about women's bodies. I thought the biggest scandal that didn't turn into a scandal at the GOP convention was when Governor Romney came out and said that he supported abortion rights in cases of rape or incest, going against his party platform. It was one of the first times I've seen him buck the party, and I thought that actually might make some Republicans begrudgingly respect him. It never turned into an issue. I wonder if it will be during. It was another example of where I thought we could have gotten more into civics and debate, but it was glossed over, and probably for the good of the GOP that they didn't need the controversy. And to your note on third parties, I completely agree. The last time I remember seeing any third party coverage was when Pat Buchanan in '96 ran on the Reform Party, and they covered that a little bit. And it's worth pointing out, our first third party president got in with 38% of the vote, and he was a Republican, and his name was Lincoln. We'll be right back after this. This is the point. And give us your comments below, why don't you? Welcome back. Your dreams were your ticket out. This is the point. What say should men have over what women do with their bodies? A lot if you believe certain prominent Republicans, social conservatives, and members of the religious right. Our next point contributor, Michael Kaufman, has a different take. Take a look.
My name is Michael Kaufman, and my point is really simple. No man should control women's bodies. No man should control whether women have access to birth control, and no man should determine if women have the right to abortion. You know, bodily integrity is critical for personal autonomy. So if any man, because of his religious position, his social, his political position, is able to force a woman to bear a child she does not want, or take away her power to decide if and when to get pregnant, then he's robbing her of her personal integrity. Now, does this mean that men have no role in relation to women's reproductive rights? Well, of course we do. In ongoing relationships, couples should determine together if and when they decide to bring a child into the world. Now, of course, mistakes will happen, birth control will fail, and people sometimes are just plain stupid. But it doesn't matter. That doesn't mean in those circumstances any man should be able to decide for a woman if she is going to bear a child or not. Well, what can men do? Well, first of all, we can take responsibility as much as possible for birth control. Secondly, we've got to speak out. We've got to speak out in our religious institutions, in our halls of government, in our workplaces, in our families, in our schools. We've got to speak out in support of women's right to choose. We've got to support pro-choice candidates. I'm one of the guys that wrote a statement called Men for Women's Choice. If you'd like to read that, if you'd like to read the blog I write about men and supporting gender equality, visit michaelkaufman.com.
Thank you, Michael. I don't believe you really painted that. It's a great background. We should have had that for our drug show. Well, my first question goes to Hugo, because a lot of interesting points there in that point. And of course, earlier this year, we saw the congressional hearings on birth control, which had no women participants, which is sort of like a congressional hearing on prostate health run by the cast of The View. What is your sense about the role men do and should play in making decisions about women's bodies?
Well, I think Michael nailed it. I mean, it's a little prop here. I actually assign his book, The Guy's Guide to Feminism, to my students. So Michael
Really?
is, speaking my language here. He's absolutely right. The real question that is being dodged here is whether women are adults. Once you become an adult, you become sovereign, autonomous over your own body. And as a man, that never gets questioned. You may get your ID checked when you're buying a bottle of beer, but beyond that, you're never going to get challenged on that. The conservative position is that we should treat sexually active women, and especially pregnant women, as if they are minors, as if they're not adults.
Give me an example.
Well, for example, requiring that a woman have an ultrasound before having an abortion.
In the state of Virginia.
And this has been proposed in many other states as well. What it's saying is, we don't trust you to be an adult and make your own decisions. We don't trust you and your doctor to talk about this together. The state is going to prescribe certain behaviors for you. Who do we do that for? We do that for children all the time, but we never do it to men. And men should demand that women in their lives, including pregnant women, have the same body autonomy that biology naturally gives to us.
Could it not be argued that those ultrasound bills are enacted by politicians who are opposed to abortion, recognize abortion is the law of the land, but nevertheless are determined to make it as uncomfortable and difficult as possible to terminate a pregnancy?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things the GOP figured out a long time ago is that you couldn't ban abortion outright. And instead, they pursued an incremental approach, making it more and more difficult, erecting more and more obstacles, to eventually get the point where at least there's a de facto ban on abortion, even if abortion is still technically legal. So there's no question this isn't about informing women about their bodies or about what's growing in utero. This is about making abortion more difficult and this is what's really disgusting, about making it more psychologically traumatizing for those women who do choose to go through with it. It's a kind of slut shaming which forces women to experience the most unpleasant aspects of a pregnancy termination without any opportunity for privacy or reflection. It's state-mandated shame.
Kathy, jump in.
I take offense to the slut shaming.
I do too. I think sluts should be celebrated.
That's right.
And have their own federal holiday.
I'm not sure how to respond to that.
They have their own reality shows all the time.
That's true. They're rewarded in Hollywood.
Yeah.
But Kathy,
right.
let me take a guess. The
Memorial Day
argument I want to say that I think the argument that I would offer against what you just said is that what people who are opposed to women's reproductive rights, I don't like the terms pro-choice and pro-life, I think they're both manipulative, but I think that people who are opposed to abortion rights would say, look, we really do believe this is a civil rights issue, whether it's religious or not. Jesus didn't mention it, but we believe it's a civil rights issue. We believe that we want to do everything we can to protect the life of this fetus within the legal system. And so making women uncomfortable, that's not why we're doing it, that's not the goal. We're not trying to shame women, we're trying to save the lives of the unborn.
Absolutely. Here's one of the things that I think I'm happy to stipulate, that the people on the other side are sometimes motivated by a desire to shame. I think that is legitimately true.
I would say generally,
but,
but
also
not
motivated by a belief that they are saving the lives of unborn children.
And do they not have that civic right to pursue that with all the methods at their disposal?
Of course they have a civic right, but the fact that they hold a belief passionately does not give them the right to impose that belief on others, nor does the sincerity of their belief make the facts to which they're appealing any less untrue. It doesn't make what their argument is a valid one. Obviously we're arguing from different perspectives. We're arguing, I think a lot of us, Michael Kaufman's arguing, the Democratic Party today is arguing that the perspective we need to see this from is the perspective of a woman's sovereignty over her own body. A sovereignty that men enjoy naturally thanks to biology.
But I don't see the point that who's taking that sovereignty from them. Abortion is law of the land. To me, it's moot. Abortion is legal. Anybody can go right now and get an abortion, and no one's going to stop them.
Well, no, that's actually not correct. In the state of Virginia, for example, go ahead.
everyone isn't allowed to go get an abortion no matter what they want. It's absolutely about economics in this country. Rich people will always be allowed to have safe and legal abortions. As soon as you force the poor into a corner and take away all the reproductive rights and the funding that goes along with them, then you're forcing people to go into alleys and do that. Secondly, I think that people who are opposed to abortion, and this is my personal opinion, not based on facts, are straight up misogynist. There's nothing about this. The fetishizing of fetuses in this country is straight up misogyny. It's not about caring for fetuses. It's about holding your position over a woman's body. What Hugo said about
in
women's
all cases, Greg, no one's doing it out of the goodness of their hearts because they believe it's a life.
7 people are doing it out of the goodness of their heart, and the other million of them are.
Nat Hentoff is a Jewish pro-life atheist who believes that it's a civil rights issue.
It's a civil rights issue to hold that position. It's not. It doesn't speak to reality. It doesn't speak to the fact that we all have wives, sisters, cousins, daughters, nieces. Does no one think about the humanity? What drives
They're
me?
all thinking about. I'm sorry. I'm not. I'm
I know,
in favor of women's
to,
reproductive rights, but I do think they are doing it because they believe in humanity. I don't think it's necessarily anti-feminism that's driving the pro-life
I didn't say anti-feminism. I can't get the word out. I didn't say anti-feminism. I really believe that a woman, as Hugo said, has absolute sovereign right over her body, and that anyone that interferes with that, we're talking about women here. No one actually cares about a fetus. If they cared about fetuses, then there would be education and healthcare and childcare available on demand. Women would have longer periods to go on leave when they had maternity leave. We would be looking after children instead of chasing children down.
Can't both sides be right there? Can't
No.
both sides?
Not in my opinion.
Go ahead.
Let's hear from Kathy.
But Greg, you've mentioned another aspect, which is economics. So you're saying now that we as a society are responsible for poor people who need abortions?
We're responsible for poor people in every way.
But
because
who
the
need
poor cannot
abortions?
defend. Why not? It's part of healthcare. First of all, women
Why
abort
am I
naturally.
responsible for that?
What are you responsible for? Are we responsible to bail out corporations time and time again and to keep the military defense industry in vast profits?
But
Would it
what
be
if
okay
I
if they
disagree
made
with that?
5% of a profit instead of $1 billion of profit every year?
But what we're saying is that abortion, what I had said is that abortion is the law of the land.
It is, but it's being chipped away at every second of the day by zillions of well-funded groups.
I disagree with that.
Let me ask a question for you, Kathy. On a personal level, what role should men play in deciding issues of contraception and abortion?
None.
So we agree.
None.
So this seems to be an area we agree on.
So you're willing to buck your party on that?
Absolutely no. Unless you're married and your wife is pregnant, I don't think you guys should have any say. I mean, I feel uncomfortable in this conversation right now because you guys are having all the words here. So
not at all. No,
I mean,
not at all. Not one bit. I actually believe that this is really that we're all agreeing on what I think is the conservative point of view. I mean that individuals have the right to their own persons. Would you agree on that?
Well, yeah, my well, you know, I'm not here to talk about my personal view, but my personal view is economics. I don't think my taxpayer money should be paying for it. That's my personal view of it.
I can agree with you about that, and I would also say that my personal view is I don't think my taxpayer money should go to any bank that rips off the public.
We can agree and disagree on the morality and the religious, and that's a whole other show.
I don't think any taxpayer fund should go to abortion or the death penalty, in my opinion.
That's a whole other show we could talk about. But as far as you know, you guys talking about my body or my friend's body or my mother's body, I feel very uncomfortable with that.
But it's an interesting point that Kathy's making here, and I think that, and I appreciate that, you know, your position is different from many people in your party. And one of the things the Republicans have done is they've built a coalition based around the relatively small number of people who genuinely want to ban abortion in all instances. And then they've brought in people like Kathy, who I think are a much greater number, who are more reluctant to, for example, support federal or state financing for abortions. And they've created a patchwork quilt of people who want to support total restrictions, some restrictions, a little bit of restriction, a little bit more of what they call personal responsibility. And they've created a coalition out of that. But the bottom line is that what's happened is the economic conservatives like Kathy have ceded the issue of abortion to their most virulent members in the party, so that the party platform doesn't reflect Kathy's perfectly reasonable view that we could argue about financially. It reflects the view of a very small fringe, but unfortunately a fringe that is using the leverage of that party to get these radical ideas about ultrasounds, waiting periods, and ultimately the banning of the procedure altogether into state legislatures across this country.
Is that fair, Kathy?
I don't think that's fair. I don't think I've seceded anything. I mean, a platform is a piece of paper. It's a thought of ideas by very good and maybe some irrational people, and both parties have their wing nuts, and
No
and I'll cede that to you. But I don't believe I've ceded anything. There are pro-life people in my party, and there's many pro-choice people in my party, and I respect both sides, and I will continue to do so. But my personal view is financial and economic, and my nominee, Mitt Romney, is pro-life, and I respect him for it. And I'll respect anybody's rights, but I believe that I'll respect my party platform.
Right on.
Yeah.
And I respect that you respect that.
Thank you. And I respect you.
Well, we're just a
There's
big
a lot of
ball
respect
of lovely
here.
respect
I
here.
respect everyone at
Respect
this
Greg,
table.
too.
Thank you, darling.
And I agree. I do think that the GOP on a national level has really dropped the abortion issue for anything beyond fundraising. It's a great fundraising tool. I think on the state level, you've got true believers. I don't think the Bush family is really against
didn't care
abortion.
at all.
I think that the GOP controlled the White House, House, and Senate for 6 years. They could have defunded Planned Parenthood day one. They chose not to do it. Abortion is a great fundraising tool. On the state level, however, you're going to see a lot of real true believers that this is taking a human life, and until we recognize as a society that we don't have an abortion problem, we have an unwanted pregnancy problem. And when all the conservatives and liberals can get together and say, what are we going to do as a society to prevent unwanted pregnancies and make it, as Bill Clinton said, safe, legal, and rare, this destructive conflict will continue to divide us and raise a lot of money for both parties. We'll be right back with our next point. You're watching The Point, and we want your comments, especially on this topic, as I imagine just a few of you have opinions. Right back. Welcome back to The Point. And for our final point today, we don't have a video. I'd like to ask you all to take a look at this map. Now, you probably recognize this. This is the United States of America. But when presidential election season rolls around, that map changes into this, a different country entirely, where the so-called swing states become the only states that actually matter in the upcoming presidential contest. Now, in presidential elections, the vast majority of Americans' votes are inconsequential because voters don't live in those 6 to 8 swing states that are solidly blue or red. But even in the swing states, most voters are partisan. So all the focus of politicians, pollsters, and the media gets laser focused on that sliver of undecided voters who also happen to usually be the lowest information voters in the swing state. So essentially, we have a minority of voters in a minority of states who are the least informed, who will decide the next leader of the free world. Now, Greg, appealing to ignorant people for votes has saved reality TV, but is this really the way you want to pick a government?
No. I mean, I like this supposition that this is what we're dealing with here, that a small group of uninformed voters are the ones who are making the decisions. In my opinion, the giant corporations are making the decisions because they don't ever allow the election to go the way that they don't want it to. I will point you toward 2 previous elections where, with all due respect, George W. Bush was elected. After the first election, I was surprised Haiti didn't invade us to install a democracy. I think, as Joseph Stalin said, it's not who votes, it's who counts the votes.
Yeah.
And I think the counting of the votes is something that we need to look into a little more. 1, 2, the suppression of voters in all these states, the idea that voter fraud is an issue when it's not an issue in any way. There is so little voter fraud in this country that is.
More people die from TVs falling on their heads than vote illegally in this country.
So I think that to speak to your point that you've talked about here, California, where I live and we live right now, 30 million people. We are a country, in essence. By the time the election gets to us, it's already decided. We're completely irrelevant by the time the votes are counted, according to the media. Yet we let people in South Dakota vote when clearly they're bad decision makers. So they've chosen to live there. It's not a prison camp. They do it of their own free will. I just think that I really think that in order to make everything better and equalize the field a little bit and speak to this whole idea that these uninformed voters in 5 states are making, or 8 states are making all the decisions, 1, having the voting from Tuesday from 7 to 7 eliminates anyone who's poor or working class or can't get to a polling place or lives in a neighborhood where there aren't as many polling places as there are in rich neighborhoods. Voting should be for a week. And it should be 24 hours a day.
And you know why it's on Tuesday, don't you? The first Tuesday in November. It's on the first Tuesday in November because historically that was when the harvest was safely over for all Americans when we were an agrarian economy. The supposition was you'd need to be home on Sunday to attend church services and need at least a day to travel by horse to your polling place. We are using 19th century technology in voting right now, where you think in a democracy you want the most amount of people to vote as possible.
But they don't. That's the point about this. Arguing over these swing states and arguing over this many voters and their micro, focusing on different counties and precincts within Virginia, within Indiana, Ohio, and whatnot, is a manner of manipulating the vote rather than having everybody have access to the vote. The voting should be for a week. Everyone should be able to vote when they want to. I think you're eliminating the poor right off the bat by saying 7 to 7. The voter ID thing is nonsense.
And that's by design.
Absolutely by design. And I had another point that I've forgotten, but I'm sure that as everyone speaks, I'll probably remember it, and then some more of my hilarious comedy and satire will come to the fore.
Why is voter ID nonsense, Greg?
Voter ID is nonsense because, all right, my mother's 93 years old. She's voted in every election since Franklin Delano Roosevelt. She doesn't drive a car anymore. She doesn't possess an ID. Should she be disenfranchised? Do you see what I'm saying? Yeah. And that's what we're talking about.
In many communities, you are able to vote with an NRA photo ID, but not with a university photo ID.
Yes, and that's the big issue that's going on in Pennsylvania right now.
Yeah, and you know what? It is about making the pool of possible voters slimmer. It's a wrap on the GOP. 20 years ago, I remember when I was younger, President George H.W. Bush vetoed the motor voter bill, which to me as a kid sounded like a really smart thing. Whenever you went to get your license, boom, you're registered, you can go vote. It seems efficient, pro-democratic. President Bush Sr. said at the time, in a free country, you can't force people to vote. Well, that wasn't true. It wasn't forcing anyone to vote. It just made you eligible. And we keep seeing time and again, and I don't want to single out the Republicans on this one, and this is about more than just Republican elections shenanigans, but it does seem there's a concentrated effort to reduce the amount of people able to vote. However, the question here is swing states. How do you solve a problem when less than 1 million people in the country, and I point taken about the corporations, but less than 1 million voters, low information voters, arguably the dumbest possible people who show up to vote in 6 to 8 states are the ones deciding the leader of the free world. How do we get beyond that? Is it as simple as having, or as complex as having, a week of voting?
Well, I would also remove the voting machines. I think the voting machines are scandalous. It's like going to an ATM in the worst neighborhood in town and watching the spinning icon go round and round and round. Paper ballots are countable. Paper ballots are accountable.
That's how we got Lincoln.
Exactly. When you count paper ballots, they are counted, and that's how that works. I think they've done everything they can, jiggery, pokery, chicanery, whatever you want to call it.
As far as the million votes, anyone who thinks machines do a better job than a man deserves a girlfriend who believes the same thing.
I don't know how to address the exact point about the 1 million uninformed voters that are apparently deciding the election, other than to say that they have 2 months now to study up. And I don't think they're going to. I think there's a lot of people who don't care whatsoever who's president.
I think you should just have one voting day, a universal day, just one long day.
National holiday?
Maybe a Saturday, I think would be great. And I think that all polls should open and close the same time, whether East Coast opens the West Coast the same time. So if it opens at 7 a.m., 4 a.m. here, I just think it should be the same, and all polls close at the same time.
Well,
whatever, but you don't, you know what happens here.
That's something that both parties agree on.
That's right.
The West Coast gets screwed.
The West Coast gets screwed. We get screwed. At 6 o'clock, it's over here. So that's what I think it should happen.
People look on, they see who won in the East Coast finals, and they decide not to go out and vote at night.
And it's hard for people like me to get out the vote.
Just on the larger question of how we got here, I think part of the problem is something that we're seeing demographically. Increasingly, there's this phenomenon that demographers talk about in terms of affiliation. We like to live around people who share our values. California used to be a moderate state that leaned slightly Republican, but we had a huge amount of conservative white flight to the mountain states, to Idaho, to Montana, and so forth, making those states redder. And so people tend to move in this country towards where people share their values. So what we've been seeing lately is the bluer states are getting bluer, the redder states are getting redder, and a handful of states are purple. And there's a shrinking number of places where you actually have a roughly equal number of conservatives and liberals. And that intensifies the competition in those areas. So part of this is not necessarily about the management of resources when it comes to election campaigning. It's about the reality that liberals have gotten more liberal and want to live with liberals, and conservatives have become more conservative and want to live with conservatives. I mean, we've seen a state like Alabama and Mississippi has moved farther to the right in 20 years. California has moved farther to the left in 20 years.
Has it though? California is still a rather conservative
Well,
state.
I think it's California, there are conservative pockets inland, but in terms of who controls the state legislature, I mean, Republicans are completely, with respect, irrelevant in Sacramento.
Yeah.
And if the little shred of relevance is that we require a 2/3 majority to pass a budget up there. If we took that away and pass a tax increase, the Republicans could just go play golf all day because there's so few of them left in California.
So do you think it was Governor Schwarzenegger's celebrity that got him the gig?
I think Governor Schwarzenegger.
That's a dumb question. Of course it was. Yes.
Of course.
And Darrow Issa's millions of dollars.
Right. Well, yes.
And Greg Davis being recalled.
Yes.
We're getting a
ran
little
away with
inside
the surplus.
baseball for our not California.
Of course, and we
viewers.
all know any legislator who inherits a surplus and turns it into a deficit deserves to be recalled unless their name is Bush. Well, I got to point that out in California. Well, then let me ask you one question. With this system, really, who benefits from it? Does one of the parties benefit from this? Kathy, does GOP have an edge, or is it
Neither party
corporations have an
benefits.
edge?
Nobody benefits from this.
This current system just seems so inefficient, and that it really just falls. It'll help someone differently every time.
But it's almost like what Winston Churchill says: democracy is not the best form, but it's the best form. Whatever the quote was, it's the best form. There's nothing better out there until somebody shows it to me. This is what we have.
Well, something better out there
Well,
is...
Greg probably has something that he's going to share with us
Well,
right
ancient
now.
Greek democracy, they had slaves and women couldn't vote, and that's how it should be.
I'm
joking, of course.
That's how it was here.
No, I think it benefits the Republicans utterly. I think they've never had a majority in this country. I think most people are moderate to conservative. I don't think most people swing wildly one way or the other. But I think the fact that, for instance, when John Kerry in 2004, Fox News called Ohio at, what was it, about 6 p.m., 5 p.m.? And that was the end of that. No one ever talked about it again. And then they went and counted the votes in a secret room. The registrar of Cuyahoga County wouldn't let the press in to watch them count the votes, which is utterly illegal, and said it was Homeland Security. I think it absolutely,
was this Ohio Secretary of State.
Thank you. That it absolutely benefits the Republicans in every single way. Because if the majority of people voted, Al Gore would have been president. I mean, if the majority of votes were counted and heard, the decision by the Supreme Court in 2000 was irrevocably damaging to this country's integrity and to the Supreme Court's integrity. I think there's a lot of precedents that would point it toward. It's not for the majority of people. It's for the minority of people who want to control the other majority of
Very
people.
interesting, because I mentioned earlier I got to work with Vice President Gore covering the conventions, and during one of the segments he actually said that at the time of the recount controversy with Governor Bush, he supported the Electoral College, but over the past dozen years his views have changed. He no longer believes in the Electoral College and supports one man, one vote. I know Electoral College is different than the issue we started out on, but do you guys still believe in the Electoral College system, or do you think it's become obsolete? What do you think, Kathy?
I still believe in it. I think, again, until you find something better, I just don't think you can disenfranchise the states, the smaller states in our union, like Delaware.
So Rhode Island gets as much say as Texas.
You have to, the founding fathers had a reason for doing the things the way they did, and I think it still works. Stop.
They did.
I know where Greg's going with this.
Wealthy white male
I know where
landowners.
he's
That's
going with
how-
this.
Fathers would be the operative word on that one.
Okay.
All men are created equal.
Well, and actually, Judson Phillips of Tea Party Nation came out last year and said that he would support only letting landowners vote, which is a pretty creative way to say screw you to returning troops. But
not all founders were racist, Greg, but
no, they were not.
No, they were not.
they had some great ideas.
No question.
Absolutely.
So I think it's worked for 200 and some years, and I think it's still a good way to go.
Right on. Hugo?
I'm not sure that it's worked. I mean, I think Greg's point is correct that the 2000 election left lasting scars in terms of our distrust of how votes were counted, our distrust of the Supreme Court, and so forth. And if the situation were reversed and we ended up with what seemed like an engineered democratic victory, I think a whole other section of the country would feel tremendously disenfranchised. I mean, ultimately, as Californians, our votes count less. It's not just that we get less political advertising. We're less likely to be able to influence the outcome of the election than if we lived in Nevada.
Is that not the greatest argument for election week instead of election day?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the fact that the West Coast is so disenfranchised, the fact that, and this is something that a lot of Republicans said, a lot of Republicans who push back against the Al Gore won the popular vote argument by saying that there's tons of conservatives on the West Coast who saw that it was locked up and they never showed up to vote, and Bush would have won the popular vote by a wider margin in 2000 if it hadn't been for the time.
I agree with that, but I just don't see logistically, as somebody who does get out the vote professionally, I don't see logistically how you could do a whole week. I think you're opening up yourself to voter fraud and a lot of shenanigans up there and on both sides, and I just don't see how you can
Let's
do
say
it.
a weekend then.
You know-
Anything but a 12-hour period on a weekday.
Oh, no, I'm with
Yeah,
you. I'm with you.
we agree on that.
I'm with you on that. I think it needs to be sort of like a national holiday, quasi-national holiday, and I think that we have to make it available for everyone, including your mother.
And we
God
can
bless
go
her.
in small steps
I'll drive her.
with early voting, which is happening in many states.
I agree.
And
Yeah.
that's at least a provisional step
That's right.
towards
And
creating
permanent
more options.
absentees.
And early voting was something that really helped a lot of seniors in Florida, and they're very upset that it's been taken away from so many of them. And you know, in a democracy, I think we should be doing everything we can to make it easier for everyone to vote. And it's hard to understand why anybody would disagree with
Well,
that.
same thing with the military votes.
Yes.
We should
Yeah.
Absolutely.
make sure that those are in on time, and you know
Yes.
that's been
Which means they have to
Challenge
send out
as
on
well.
time.
That's exactly right. So if you're out there and you're afraid that you're going to be disenfranchised, that you don't have the right ID, or somehow your vote won't be counted, put a stamp on it, baby. Mail it in. That's the safest way. This has been a really terrific show. I wish I could do 5 hours with you guys. It's been terrific. I want to thank our point givers, the Guy's Guide to Feminism author Michael Kaufman, and from the LA Times editorial board, Jon Healey. What a pleasure to talk to three brilliant people with different points of view that are so smart and cool and entertaining. Of course, Greg Proops, Hugo Schwyzer, and Kathy Tavoularis. Greg, where can people follow you?
At Greg Proops on Twitter, or they can go to gregproops.com or proopcast.com and download my podcast for free.
Are you on tour right now?
I am on tour incessantly till the end of time. I'm on an endless tour like Bob Dylan, and I'll be wearing his outfit, being dressed as Vincent Price, the dead Mississippi gambler, on my next tour.
That's a great new
I'm
album.
going to be in the front row.
Yeah.
I still want to open for you someday. Kathy, where can people follow you?
Kathy Tavoularis, at Kathy Tavoularis on Twitter, and on the road with Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan and all the congressional candidates in
Did
California.
you have a good time? We weren't that bad, right?
And, here?
Here.
I had a great time. You guys are great.
Rock
Thank
on.
you so much.
Tell your Republican friends to come on over.
Absolutely. My
Hugo?
best friends are Democrats.
Right on.
Wow. Speaking as one of those Democrats, you can follow me at Hugo Schwyzer on Twitter, and you can also follow me at hugoschwyzer.net. You can follow some of my writings at Jezebel and Roll Reboot, and the paperback of Carrie Otis's Beauty Disrupted is going to be in stores on October 23rd.
I would really be very curious to read that. I look forward to it. Thank you all. I had a great time. Thank you guys. Give us your comments below. Keep watching The Point, and get out there and vote, and get out there and get your friends to vote. If you don't vote, you have no right to complain, and what's more fun than that in America? We'll see you next time.